No, for Lincoln, the glory of democracy is how it freely invites every member of a community to embrace those rights to life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness for all. It is a means. And the moment that it does become merely an end in itself, merely a matter of taking polls and referendums, that is the moment when it loses all credibility, when it loses the passion, when it loses the degree, the demand, the legitimacy for self-sacrifice that any democracy must demand of its members. So for Abraham Lincoln, the question of slavery was not something which could be settled merely by a show of hands, just as dinner cannot be settled by the vote of 2 wolves and a lamb. No, instead there must be some principles of right and wrong. There must be some standard. There must be some moral and ethical core to democracy, or else democracy will eventually collapse on itself. Machines do not run merely on their own machinery. And a democracy, like a machine, will not run indefinitely merely because it has gears. For Lincoln, it is the spirit that democracy serves. And that is the spirit of right, of truth, of liberty. Apart from that, all the battleships, all the armies, and all the fleets on the face of the earth cannot defend a democracy. Armed with that, a democracy can repel every intruder and every aggressor. We must, said Lincoln in 1838, we must either be a nation that lives eternally or be the means of our own self-destruction. It is up to us. So what is at stake here in the Lincoln-Douglas debates? Ultimately, it is not even about slavery. It is about democracy itself. And it is an ongoing debate that we participate in even today. What is the purpose of democracy? What is the place of right and wrong in democratic debate? And so, over the course and the distance of 150 years, Lincoln and Douglas still debate. And they invite us today to join them on the platform. Thank you very much.
If you have any questions, feel free to come forward to the microphones at the end of each aisle. And while we're waiting, thank you very much for an outstandingly insightful and informative view of the Lincoln-Douglas debates. Any bashful? I will.
I've had the privilege of reading your newest book, and what I thought was the most revealing is we're thinking about this national election and what are the battleground states. And I think you made such a great point that in Illinois, the battleground was really the central Illinois. Can you comment on that?
Well, we think today that swing states, battleground states, hinge states, this is something which is just a new development in American electoral politics. And of course, like so much else, it isn't. In a sense, Illinois was a miniature of the United States in 1858. There was a north, which was strongly anti-slavery. There was a south to the state, which was pro-slavery. And there was a middle band to the state, and it couldn't make up its mind what it was. But definitely it was what had to be won, because neither north of the state or south of the state alone could win an election. So it would depend on the candidates winning those swing counties and districts in the middle of the state. And both Lincoln and Douglas are bidding for them. In fact, you can track the intensity with which they bid for them by just looking on the map and seeing where they spoke. Both Lincoln and Douglas spoke several times in the north of the state. They spoke only once in the south of the state. But in the middle, oh, talk about a target-rich environment. They're showing up in the towns in the mid part of the state daily, here, there, and everywhere, sometimes repeatedly. So strategy in politics, again, this is not something that recently happened because a number of political flacks and spinmeisters had been setting up the campaign. This was, in fact, going on, and people were very conscious of this kind of thing in 1858 as well.
First, I want to thank you for your presentation, and thank you for your books, and thank you for being such a public figure, bringing Lincoln and this history to our country at this time. My own research and writing in Lincoln concerns the use of Lincoln, use by Lincoln of the language and idea of covenant, and how he was the last public figure to probe societal obligations in terms of covenant. Since Lincoln, organic metaphors derived from biology and Darwin have dominated our views of civic bonds. Why do you think Lincoln's covenantal view waned so quickly?
Well, part of it is, when we talk about covenant, we're really kind of talking about contract. We're talking about a reasonable and rational arrangement between two parties. And this was very much the way the Enlightenment looked at politics. Before the Enlightenment, political society was a matter of organic relationships. People were born into a status, into a hierarchy. Some people were born as kings, some people were born as butchers, some people were born as peasants. But what you were born as, that you were by nature, and that you stayed all through your life. Kings did not become peasants, peasants did not become kings. So in this fixed hierarchy, there was very little room for people to think of their society as being something that they intelligently agreed upon, as though it was a collection of propositions. Now comes the Enlightenment. The Enlightenment completely rewrites what we think of as political society. John Locke, Thomas Jefferson, the great figures in 18th century political science, really reconceive politics as exactly an arrangement between intelligent, consenting individuals. But then, in reaction against the Enlightenment, comes the great Romantic revolt of the 19th century, and with it a restoration of organic politics, politics based upon race, blood, ethnicity, language, religion. And of course, we know where that leads in the German context, but it was very popular in many other places as well. So the reason that Lincoln's idea of contract or covenant seems to have been superseded is because, in fact, it was superseded in many places in the 19th century by the Romantic idea of politics. And that what Lincoln would conceive of as being a contractual arrangement or a covenantal relationship, this is very much the Enlightenment's view of politics as being something between intelligent, consenting members of a community. So I think, yes, superseded, but happily we have this Constitution. Happily we have this Declaration of Independence, which are rooted in an idea of intelligent arrangements between individuals in a society. And we have those as markers constantly to come back to. Lincoln, in fact, said that the Declaration of Independence contained things in it which you might not have understood in 1776. But they were put there because later on these were going to become questions, and then they could become what Lincoln called hard nuts for tyrants to crack. So there were these little unexploded devices in the Declaration of Independence ready to protect the idea of popular government, of self-government by the people. So yes, some of Lincoln's ideas do seem to have been passed by. They've been passed by Hitler, by Marx, by Lenin, by Stalin, by Pol Pot, other significant popular political figures of the past 100 years. Happily, we have also passed them by as well. And the Declaration of Independence is still here, and the Constitution is still here. Happily, so is Lincoln.
In the context of this conference focusing on the Underground Railroad, did the Lincoln-Douglas debates address, or indeed did either of the candidates have a position on the Fugitive Slave Act and on this issue of the Underground Railroad and its place in, I guess you'd say, civil disobedience?